The easiest person to fool is the one who thinks money can buy love. Ethan Carter had everything a man could dream of, yet every night he went to bed, wondering if anyone had ever truly seen him. At 32 years old, the handsome billionaire stood in the center of a ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers, expensive tuxedos, designer gowns, and smiling faces that seemed to sparkle brighter than the diamonds surrounding them. The evening had been planned down to the smallest detail. Family members whispered excitedly. Business partners raised glasses in celebration. Reporters waited outside, convinced they were about to witness the engagement of one of America's most admired entrepreneurs. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and wrapped his fingers around a velvet ring box. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this chapter of his life would finally bring the happiness his success never could. Then everything changed. As he walked toward the private garden behind the ballroom, he heard familiar laughter drifting through the open doors. It was Vanessa, the woman he had planned to marry within the hour. Curious, he slowed his steps. She hadn't noticed him. Neither had the elegant friend standing beside her. Ethan stopped as her cheerful voice carried through the quiet evening air. "Of course I don't love him the way people think," she said, with a laugh that instantly made his heart sink. "I love the life that comes with him, his private jet, his companies, his beach house in Malibu, his penthouse in Manhattan. Who would walk away from billions?" Her friend laughed in agreement. "So you'll marry him anyway," Vanessa answered without hesitation. "Why wouldn't I? Once the wedding is over, I'll never have to worry about money again." Ethan stood frozen behind the stone column, unable to move as every word shattered the future he had imagined. His hand slowly released the ring box back into his pocket. The music inside the ballroom continued playing, guests continued celebrating, and waiters continued serving champagne as though nothing had happened. Yet for Ethan, the world had become painfully silent. Minutes later, he quietly walked through the front entrance, climbed into the back seat of his black SUV, and told his driver only 3 words: "Take me home." During the long drive through the glowing city skyline, he never looked at his phone despite dozens of missed calls flooding the screen. Every relationship he had ever trusted suddenly replayed inside his mind. Every compliment, every promise, every smile. Were they all purchased by the fortune attached to his name? When he finally reached his mansion, Ethan stood alone beside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. The view that millions envied had never felt more empty. As dawn approached, one impossible decision quietly formed inside his mind, a decision that would force him to abandon the billionaire everyone admired and become someone the world barely noticed. The following morning, the mansion that had always echoed with meetings, assistants, and endless schedules felt strangely quiet. Ethan Carter sat alone in his private study as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the polished hardwood floor. His phone continued vibrating every few seconds. Board members wanted answers. Reporters wanted comments. Vanessa had already left more than 30 voice messages. He ignored every one of them. For the first time in years, making another $1 billion no longer seemed important. Finding one honest heart did. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. His longtime driver and trusted friend, Marcus Reed, stepped inside carrying 2 cups of fresh coffee. Marcus had worked for Ethan's family for more than 20 years, long enough to speak honestly when everyone else simply agreed. He placed the coffee on the table and studied Ethan's exhausted face. "You have not slept, have you?" Ethan slowly shook his head. "Tell me something, Marcus. If I lost everything today, who would still recognize me?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "The people who matter would recognize your character, not your bank account." Ethan looked out the window. "Then I have spent too many years surrounded by the wrong people." Silence settled between them before Marcus spoke again. "What are you gonna do?" Ethan stood and walked toward the massive wall of glass overlooking the city below. Thousands of people hurried through their morning routines, each carrying dreams and burdens invisible from this height. "I'm going to disappear," he said quietly. Marcus frowned. "Disappear?" Ethan nodded. "Not forever. Long enough to discover whether genuine love still exists." Over the next several hours, the impossible slowly became reality. Ethan canceled public appearances, transferred daily operations to his executive team, and instructed them to contact him only during true emergencies. His legal advisors believed he was taking a private vacation. His investors assumed he needed time after ending his engagement. Nobody questioned the billionaire's decision. Nobody imagined what he was actually planning. By late afternoon, Ethan stood inside a small apartment owned by one of Marcus's relatives on the opposite side of the city. The expensive suits were gone. The custom-made shoes disappeared into storage boxes. His luxury watch rested inside a locked safe. He pulled on faded work pants with worn knees, a loose gray shirt stained from years of construction work, and old work boots that felt heavy with every step. Marcus handed him a battered baseball cap and looked at him with disbelief. "You do not look like Ethan Carter anymore." Ethan glanced into the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The polished billionaire had vanished. Looking back at him was an ordinary laborer who could easily blend into any construction site or busy neighborhood. Marcus finally asked the question weighing on his mind. "What kind of work will you do?" Ethan picked up a weathered wheelbarrow leaning against the apartment wall and wrapped both hands around its rough handles. A quiet smile crossed his face for the first time in days. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "the city will meet a man it has never noticed before. And I have a feeling my real life is only beginning." Before sunrise, the city already pulsed with restless energy. Delivery trucks rolled through crowded streets, construction crews gathered on sidewalks, and dozens of laborers waited quietly for another chance to earn enough money to make it through the day. Ethan stood among them with his weathered wheelbarrow resting beside him. No luxury sedan waited nearby. No assistants carried his schedule. No one greeted him with respect. He was simply another man hoping someone would offer him work. The foreman barely looked up as he walked past the line of workers. He pointed toward a pile of bricks and said, "You, take the wheelbarrow and keep moving until quitting time." Ethan nodded without complaint. Only a week earlier, people had stood whenever he entered a room. Now they barely made eye contact. By mid-morning, his shoulders already ached from pushing loads of concrete bags across uneven ground. Sweat soaked through his faded shirt, while dust settled over his face, until he no longer recognized the reflection staring back from a nearby window. During a short break, he walked toward a small food stand, hoping to buy a simple sandwich and a bottle of water. Before he reached the counter, another customer stepped in front of him. The owner smiled warmly at the well-dressed businessman, then turned to Ethan with an impatient expression. "You can wait." Ethan quietly stepped aside. 5 more customers were served before anyone acknowledged him again. When his turn finally arrived, the last fresh sandwich had already been sold. He thanked the owner anyway, and walked away with only a bottle of water. Hunger surprised him more than disappointment. It had been years since he had gone without a proper meal. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, he continued pushing heavy loads across the busy construction site. Some workers laughed at his slow pace. Others ignored him completely. One man tossed a few loose coins onto the ground and jokingly told Ethan to buy himself cleaner clothes. Ethan simply picked up the coins, handed them back with a calm smile, and returned to work without saying another word. The reaction confused everyone around him. They expected anger or embarrassment. Instead, they saw quiet dignity. As evening approached, Ethan leaned against the handles of the old wheelbarrow and watched hundreds of workers leave with tired faces that looked strangely peaceful. For the first time, he understood that many people carried burdens far heavier than bricks. They carried invisible struggles that the world never stopped to notice. Looking across the busy street, Ethan realized something that unsettled him more than losing his fortune ever could. Poverty did not only change the way people lived, it changed the way the world looked at them. And somewhere beyond the crowded intersection, someone was quietly watching the exhausted wheelbarrow pusher with eyes filled not with judgment, but with genuine compassion. The next morning arrived with crisp air and gray clouds hanging over the city, but the construction site came alive long before the sun fully appeared. Ethan pushed his wheelbarrow through the entrance as workers hurried in every direction, each one focused on earning another day's pay. He had barely taken a few steps when he noticed a small fruit stand across the street that had not been there the day before. Behind the neatly arranged baskets of apples, oranges, bananas, and peaches stood a young woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile that seemed completely untouched by the harshness surrounding her. Her name was Naomi Brooks. Every morning before sunrise, she loaded fresh fruit into her old pickup truck, drove across town, and spent the entire day serving construction workers, delivery drivers, and anyone who stopped by. Business was never easy, but she greeted every customer with the same quiet kindness. Around noon, Ethan finally walked toward the stand, exhausted after hours of moving heavy bags of cement and stacks of bricks. He reached into his pocket and counted the few dollars he had earned that morning. It was not enough to buy both lunch and water. Before he could say anything, Naomi looked at his tired face and noticed the dust covering his clothes. "Long morning?" she asked with a friendly smile. Ethan nodded. "Longer than I expected." She handed him a bottle of cold water before he even asked for one. "You look like you need this first." Ethan accepted it with surprise. "Thank you. How much do I owe you?" Naomi glanced at the worn bills in his hand and quietly shook her head. "Just pay for the sandwich. The water is my treat today." Ethan hesitated. It had been years since anyone had offered him something without expecting anything in return. "I cannot accept that," he replied politely. Naomi laughed softly. "Then consider it an investment in making sure one more hard-working person finishes the day." Her answer caught him completely off guard. She did not ask where he came from. She did not judge his clothes or his job. She simply treated him like another human being. As Ethan ate his sandwich beneath the shade of a nearby tree, he watched Naomi interact with every customer who approached her stand. She spoke respectfully to the janitor, joked with the truck drivers, helped an elderly man carry his groceries to his car, and even gave a free banana to a little boy whose mother apologized because she had forgotten her wallet. There was no difference in the kindness she showed the wealthy businessman wearing an expensive watch and the laborer covered in dust. Ethan found himself smiling without realizing it. For the first time since leaving his former life behind, he met someone whose heart appeared untouched by status or appearance. Yet he had no idea that this simple conversation beside a modest fruit stand would become the beginning of the greatest test either of them would ever face. Days slowly turned into weeks, and without realizing it, Ethan began measuring time differently. He no longer counted successful business deals or stock prices. Instead, he counted the quiet conversations he shared with Naomi during short lunch breaks beside her fruit stand. Every afternoon, after finishing another load with his old wheelbarrow, he found himself walking across the street, not because he was hungry, but because a few minutes with her somehow made the weight of the day disappear. Naomi never asked questions that made him uncomfortable. She never wondered why he had no family nearby, or why someone with his calm manners worked such a difficult job. She simply listened whenever he spoke, and smiled whenever he tried to make her laugh. Ethan learned that Naomi rented a small apartment only a few miles away, and worked nearly 12 hours every day to help support her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents passed away years earlier. Despite carrying responsibilities that would overwhelm many people, she never complained. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, arranged every piece of fruit with care, and greeted every customer as though they were the first person she had seen that day. Watching her became Ethan's favorite part of life. One afternoon, heavy rain suddenly swept across the construction site. Workers rushed toward temporary shelters, while Naomi quickly covered her fruit stand with a large waterproof tarp. Ethan immediately crossed the street to help without being asked. Together they secured the tables before the wind could scatter everything. When the rain finally slowed, Naomi laughed as she noticed both of them soaked from head to toe. "Well," she said with a grin, "at least the fruit stayed dry." Ethan laughed with her, feeling lighter than he had in years. It was a simple moment, but it felt more genuine than every luxury vacation he had ever taken. As the days passed, other workers began teasing Ethan whenever they noticed him stopping by the fruit stand. They joked that he had finally found someone worth working overtime for. Ethan simply smiled and never denied it. Deep inside, however, another feeling quietly grew stronger every day. He hated lying to Naomi. Every honest conversation made his hidden identity feel heavier. More than once, he almost told her everything. He imagined explaining who he really was and why he had chosen this unusual path. Yet each time he looked into her trusting eyes, fear stopped him. If she discovered the truth too soon, he would never know whether her kindness belonged to the man she believed he was, or the billionaire whose face occasionally appeared on magazine covers. One evening, just before closing time, Naomi handed Ethan a small paper bag filled with fresh peaches that had not sold during the day. He reached for his wallet, but she gently pushed his hand away. "Friends do not keep score," she said softly. Ethan looked at her for several silent seconds before accepting the bag. At that moment, he realized something that both warmed and troubled his heart. He was no longer pretending to care about Naomi as part of an experiment. He was genuinely falling in love, but hidden beneath that growing happiness was a secret that threatened to destroy everything they had built together. As autumn settled over the city, Ethan and Naomi's friendship became the brightest part of each day. They shared simple lunches, laughed over small moments, and talked about dreams that had nothing to do with wealth. Naomi often spoke about opening a neighborhood grocery store one day, a place where families could afford fresh food without worrying about high prices. Ethan admired the way she measured success. She never mentioned luxury homes or expensive vacations. She simply wanted enough to take care of the people she loved. Every conversation made him admire her more, yet every conversation also deepened the secret he carried. One Friday afternoon, after work ended early, Ethan offered to help Naomi load the remaining crates of fruit into her old pickup truck. As they worked side by side, a sleek black luxury sedan slowly pulled up beside the stand. A sharply dressed man stepped out, carrying himself with quiet confidence. His name was Brandon Hayes, a successful real estate developer who had recently begun visiting Naomi's stand almost every afternoon. Ethan noticed the expensive watch, the polished shoes, and the confident smile that reminded him of the life he had temporarily left behind. Brandon greeted Naomi warmly and handed her a business card. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he said. "My company is looking for someone reliable to manage the cafe inside our newest office building. It comes with a full salary, health insurance, and steady hours." Naomi looked surprised. "That is very generous," Brandon smiled. "You deserve an opportunity that matches your work ethic." Ethan remained silent while lifting another crate into the truck. He had promised himself he would never interfere with Naomi's choices. Yet hearing another man offer her the stable future she had always dreamed about stirred emotions he had not expected. After Brandon drove away, Naomi quietly folded the business card and slipped it into her pocket. "He seems like a good man," Ethan said carefully. Naomi nodded. "He has always been respectful," She paused before adding, "My grandmother thinks I should accept the job. She says it could finally give us some security." Ethan forced a small smile, even though disappointment quietly settled inside him. He wanted Naomi to have every opportunity she deserved, but he also feared that each step toward a better future might carry her farther away from him. That evening, Marcus met Ethan outside the apartment where he had been living. One look at Ethan's face told him everything. "You are falling in love," Marcus said gently. Ethan did not deny it. Instead, he stared at the city lights glowing in the distance. "I wanted this experiment to answer one question," he admitted. "Instead, it created 100 more." Marcus folded his arms. "Then perhaps it is time to tell her the truth." Ethan slowly shook his head. "Not yet. If I reveal everything now, I will never know whether her feelings belong to the man she knows or the fortune she has never seen." But as Ethan watched Naomi drive away into the evening, he could not escape the growing feeling that waiting much longer might cost him the very person he had come to treasure most. The following week tested Ethan in ways he had never imagined. Naomi accepted an interview for the management position Brandon had offered, not because she was chasing wealth, but because she wanted a more stable future for her grandmother. Ethan congratulated her with a sincere smile, even though his heart quietly ached. Every part of him wanted to tell her the truth, to explain that he could erase every financial burden she carried with a single signature. But he knew that doing so now would destroy the very reason he had begun this journey. A few days later, Naomi returned from the interview with mixed emotions. She admitted that the opportunity was wonderful, yet something still made her hesitate. Brandon had been respectful and generous, but she could not ignore the growing connection she felt with Ethan. That evening they sat together on a wooden bench overlooking a small neighborhood park after both had finished work. Children laughed on the playground, while families walked beneath the golden light of the setting sun. Naomi broke the silence first. "Do you ever wonder if life gives us impossible choices?" Ethan looked at her carefully. "Every day." She smiled sadly. "Sometimes I think my heart wants one thing, while my responsibilities demand something completely different." Ethan understood exactly what she meant, although she had no idea that he was struggling with an even greater secret. He wanted to reach for her hand, but he stopped himself. Instead, he quietly asked, "If you had no responsibilities at all, what would you choose?" Naomi looked toward the horizon before answering. "I would choose the person who makes me feel at peace, even if life stayed simple." Those words filled Ethan with hope, yet they also reminded him that their relationship rested on a foundation built around a hidden identity. 2 days later, everything became even more complicated. While delivering supplies across town, Ethan unexpectedly passed a giant digital billboard displaying the latest business magazine. His own photograph covered the screen with the headline announcing that billionaire entrepreneur Ethan Carter had remained out of public view for nearly 2 months, fueling endless speculation across the financial world. Ethan immediately lowered his cap and turned away before anyone nearby could notice his face. Unfortunately, Naomi arrived only moments later to deliver fruit to a nearby office building. She caught a brief glimpse of the enormous photograph before it changed to another advertisement. She looked at the image for a second, then glanced across the street toward Ethan. Something about the man's eyes on the billboard felt strangely familiar. But before she could think any further, the screen changed, and the moment disappeared. Ethan noticed the confusion on her face and felt his heartbeat quicken. For the first time since beginning his experiment, the wall separating his 2 worlds had started to crack. As Naomi drove home that evening, she could not shake the feeling that she had seen those same calm eyes somewhere much closer than a magazine cover, and Ethan realized that the truth he had tried so hard to protect might reveal itself long before he was ready. The morning everything changed began like any other. Ethan reported to the construction site before sunrise, pushed his wheelbarrow through the familiar gate, and prepared for another day of hard work. Naomi waved from across the street as she arranged fresh fruit beneath the striped canopy of her stand. She smiled the same warm smile that had become the brightest part of his day, but Ethan could not shake the feeling that time was running out. Just after 9 o'clock, several black sport utility vehicles rolled onto the construction site. Every conversation stopped. Workers looked at one another with confused expressions as men in business suits stepped out carrying folders and blueprints. The foreman hurried toward them, straightening his hard hat and brushing dust from his shirt. Rumors spread through the site within seconds. A major investor was arriving to inspect the property before approving the next phase of construction. Ethan quietly lowered his head and continued working, knowing exactly who those executives were. They were senior leaders from his own company. Marcus had warned him the previous night that an emergency inspection could not be postponed any longer because millions of dollars depended on the project moving forward. Ethan had hoped to avoid this moment, but there was no longer any choice. Across the street, Naomi noticed the unusual activity as customers gathered to watch the impressive convoy. Brandon also arrived for another meeting nearby and stopped to observe the scene. Everyone wondered which famous executive would appear. A few minutes later, Marcus stepped out of the lead vehicle and scanned the crowded construction site. His eyes found Ethan immediately. For a brief moment he hesitated, then walked directly toward the dusty laborer pushing the worn wheelbarrow. The workers stared in confusion as the distinguished older man stopped only a few feet away. Without saying a word, Marcus respectfully nodded his head. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," he said, clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Silence swept across the construction site. The foreman blinked in disbelief. Several workers looked from Marcus to Ethan and back again, convinced they had misunderstood. Ethan slowly removed his faded baseball cap and looked around at the stunned faces surrounding him. There was no reason to hide anymore. One by one, executives approached and greeted him with the same respect they had always shown the billionaire they worked for. The foreman nearly dropped the clipboard in his hands. The laborer who had spent weeks pushing bricks beside them was the owner of the entire project. Across the street, Naomi stood perfectly still, unable to believe what she was witnessing. The calm, humble man she had come to know was now surrounded by corporate leaders, treating him as the most important person there. Brandon's confident expression disappeared as he watched the unbelievable scene unfold. Ethan slowly turned toward Naomi. Their eyes met across the busy street. Neither of them spoke. In that silent moment, the greatest secret of his life finally stood between them, and the expression on Naomi's face told him that nothing would ever be the same again. Naomi stood frozen as the executives surrounded Ethan with unmistakable respect. The dusty work clothes, the worn boots, and the old wheelbarrow no longer matched the man everyone now called Mr. Carter. For several long seconds, she could not find the words to speak. Ethan slowly walked toward her, leaving the circle of executives behind. The entire construction site watched in complete silence. "Naomi," he said gently, "I owe you the truth." She looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had comforted her through countless ordinary afternoons. "You are Ethan Carter," she whispered, "the billionaire everyone has been searching for." He nodded. "Yes." She lowered her gaze for a moment, taking a slow breath before looking back at him. "Then every day you worked here? Every conversation? Every lunch?" Ethan answered before she could finish. "Every feeling I shared with you was real. The only thing I hid was my name." Naomi remained silent. She remembered the rainstorm, the shared sandwiches, the laughter, and the quiet dreams they had spoken about beneath the trees. None of those moments had felt false, yet learning that he had hidden such an enormous truth left her heart caught between trust and disappointment. "Why?" she finally asked. Ethan looked around at the workers who had once ignored him, and then back at Naomi. "Because I spent years surrounded by people who loved my fortune instead of me. I needed to know whether someone could care about the man before the money." Naomi's eyes filled with emotion, but her voice remained calm. "You could have trusted me enough to tell me sooner." Ethan nodded without making excuses. "You are right. I was afraid. Every day I wanted to tell you, but every day I feared that the truth would change everything before I knew whether your kindness was genuine." Naomi smiled sadly. "You know what hurts the most? It is not that you are wealthy. It is that you believed you had to carry this burden alone." Those words reached Ethan more deeply than any business success ever had. After a long silence, Naomi stepped one pace closer. "When I met you, I saw a hard-working man who treated everyone with respect. I never cared about the size of your paycheck. I cared about the person who helped me cover my fruit stand in the rain and listened whenever I spoke about my grandmother." Ethan felt the weight he had carried for months finally begin to disappear. He reached into the old wheelbarrow and placed his worn work gloves on top of the handle. "Then let me ask you one final question," he said quietly. "If you could choose between the billionaire standing here today and the wheelbarrow pusher you met on your first day at the construction site, who would you choose?" Naomi smiled through her tears and answered without hesitation. "I already chose him long before I knew his name." Ethan gently took her hand as applause slowly spread across the construction site. Even Brandon smiled respectfully before walking away, understanding that her heart had already made its decision. Months later, Ethan kept one promise he had made during those difficult weeks. Instead of replacing Naomi's fruit stand with another business, he helped her open the neighborhood grocery store she had always dreamed about. But he insisted it be built in her name, not his. The old wheelbarrow was carefully restored and placed near the entrance of the store as a quiet reminder that true love had never been found inside a mansion or a boardroom. It had been discovered beside a dusty construction site, where one kind heart recognized another before the world ever knew who either of them truly was.